Here's something most people simply did not know. In its campaign to secure the hosting rights for COP31, the UN climate change meeting next year, Australia, according to reports from the ground in Beleng, did not lobby or discuss or consult with any of the 54 African states. And given that at the United Nations, every country gets one vote, that seems like a very significant shortcoming in the Australian diplomatic effort. Well, folks, welcome back to Climate Mundial's Energy and Climate Weekly. And a couple of days ago, I posted a video sharing the results of the decision making at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change conference, which is taking place in Belém in Brazil, that Turkey was actually going to be the host of next year's conference, COP31, in the city of Antalya, and had actually beaten Australia to that, who had been trying to secure the conference for Adelaide in South Australia. And the story that I shared on a couple of days ago identified that Australia had perhaps underestimated Turkey's efforts, because essentially we're now only 1 year from the conference hosting date. Australia, at both the state government level as well as the federal government level, had been incurring significant expenses to prepare on the assumption that it was going to win. Though Turkey just simply did not back down, and the assumption that Australia would likely have been making is that if it continues to push and has all the support from European countries and other developed nations, that the weight of that would actually eventually cause Turkey to withdraw. Also the support, of course, of Pacific Island nations. Well, that didn't happen, and Turkey remained steadfast in its attempts to host the conference, and eventually it was Australia who backed down, possibly with some of a nudge coming from the German government, which would have been the default host had the two countries not been able to agree, because the Climate Change Secretariat of the United Nations is actually located in the city of Bonn. And so when there's a deadlock, it would defer to Bonn. But this story today is entirely different. It comes from a very credible source, somebody with whom I've been working for a long period of time, who's based in Africa, who lives in Africa, and is at the conference in Belém, and suggested to me that there was this situation where a lot of African states, particularly the ones that are also Commonwealth nations, were very predisposed to supporting Australia's bid, but actually didn't receive any approaches from Australia to try and secure that, whereas Turkey had likely been quite active. Now, if this report were true, and I have no reason to doubt because of the credibility of the source that it is true, this suggests that Australia had made an assumption that it had enough support just by working with European countries, other developed countries, and small island states, and actually didn't seek to engage with Africa, which has 54 member nations, all with one vote, and is actually the largest single negotiating bloc in the United Nations. Now, for me, looking at it in a situation where the government of South Australia as well as the federal government were actually incurring expenses, public expenses, on an assumption that this conference would be held in Adelaide, and they didn't negotiate or discuss support with 54 African states, is a very, very significant shortcoming in the diplomatic effort that Australia was putting in, and can only suggest that either Australia had underestimated as well the power of having African states support its bid, or it felt like there wasn't a particularly good reason to actually do this engagement. And I have personally seen in some cases where I've been discussing on a commercial basis with the Australian government the deployment of climate finance over the years, that they tend to prefer to focus the resources into Southeast Asia, more close to the region, and don't really want to be involved in Africa and see that more as the domain of other countries, which is fine, except that every now and then something will come along which actually requires there to be support mobilized in Africa. And this is one very good example of it. So perhaps now is a good moment for the Australian government, even though the loss of hosting rights for COP31 is fresh, to reflect on this and reanalyze its strategy for engaging with Africa, which is very much an up-and-coming continent, and there are lots of opportunities coming in Africa, even though it's not necessarily specifically in Australia's region. And as someone who's worked significantly in Africa over the years in places like Ghana, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, Mali, Senegal, Mozambique, literally all over Africa, Egypt as well, I can definitely say that the openness of African states to really engage with countries like Australia is enormous, and there seems to be no good reason why in an environment like this, where Australia needs the support of as many countries as possible to secure what it's trying to achieve with regard to the conference, that it couldn't have done more to work with African countries and show them that they're very important in this process. But what do you think? Is Australia's engagement with Africa an issue here? Let me know in the comments section below. If you disagree, please let me know also about that. If you've enjoyed the video, please click like, and don't forget to share it with your family, friends, and colleagues if you found it enjoyable. On that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in the next episode of Climate Mundial's Energy and Climate Weekly. Bye for now.